Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a concept that is going to fundamentally challenge how you view reality, life, and, well, what actually happens when it all seemingly stops. We are looking at the absolutely fascinating work of Sir Roger Penrose. Born in 1931, Penrose has spent 7 decades at the absolute frontier of physics. He's literally a mathematical titan. Back in 1965, he collaborated with Stephen Hawking to provide the very first rigorous proof that black holes must exist. That work alone earned him the 2020 Nobel Prize in Physics. But beyond black holes and the geometry of spacetime, Penrose has arrived at an incredibly unsettling, mathematically backed conclusion. And that conclusion? Consciousness isn't simply produced by the brain. It's actually woven into something much, much deeper.
It's the ultimate question, isn't it? Can our subjective experience actually survive physical death? To even begin to answer this, we're going to track a massive paradigm shift, weaving our way through a century of the most mind-bending physics ever discovered. I promise you, by the end of this explainer, the way you look at the universe and your specific place in it is going to be completely transformed.
Section 1. Mind transcends the machine. Penrose versus the computer. Okay, let's dive right into this. The story really kicks into high gear in 1989 when Penrose published a monumental book called The Emperor's New Mind. At the time, cognitive science was completely dominated by this assumption that the human brain was just a biological, wet computer and that consciousness was nothing more than a complex algorithm. But Penrose threw the full weight of mathematical rigor at this idea and basically said, absolutely not.
Think about formal rule following, like a standard Turing machine and just churning through an algorithm. It blindly follows steps. Now contrast that with human mathematical insight and conscious understanding. Human subjective experience, Penrose argued, simply cannot be explained by computation. He actually based this on Gödel's famous 1931 incompleteness theorem, which essentially proved that in any complex mathematical system, there are true statements that just cannot be proven from within the system itself. An algorithm gets stuck. But a human mathematician? We could step outside that system and clearly see that the statement is true. There's a fundamental gap here, and this proves that consciousness isn't just computation. The human mind transcends algorithmic rules entirely.
Section 2. The quantum measurement problem, from probabilities to reality. So, if the mind isn't a computer, what exactly is it? To find the answer, Penrose had to confront a haunting mystery at the very finest scales of physics. See, in quantum mechanics, particles don't actually have definite properties until they're measured. Before that, they exist in this blurry superposition of all possible states, described purely by probabilities. But the moment a measurement occurs, boom, it collapses into a single, definite reality. But what is it that actually causes that collapse?
Let's track how this mystery deepens across a century of physics. Back in 1927, Born Heisenberg basically said, hey, don't ask, just focus on the math. But by 1932, John von Neumann analyzed the chain of measurements and realized something crazy. A physical device measuring a quantum state is itself made of quantum particles. It creates an infinite regress. Von Neumann mathematically showed that this chain has to logically terminate at a conscious observer. Then, in 1961, Eugene Wigner took this even further with a thought experiment, predicting that 2 observers could literally see contradictory, yet perfectly correct, quantum events. And amazingly, in 2019, Massimiliano Proietti empirically tested Wigner's prediction and proved it right.
That 2019 nested measurement experiment by Proietti really cemented a reality that physicists have kind of danced around for decades. The wave function is not objective. It is relative to the observer. This empirically proves that the consciousness of the observer is completely inseparable from the quantum state of the universe itself. They are intimately, undeniably linked.
Section 3. The microtubule connection. Penrose and Hameroff's ORC-OR theory. Here, Penrose took a slightly different, highly radical approach. He proposed objective reduction. He argued that the wave function actually collapses spontaneously on its own due to spacetime curvature at the tiniest possible scales. But he needed a biological mechanism in the brain that could somehow host these super delicate quantum events. Enter Stuart Hameroff, an anesthesiologist from the University of Arizona. Together, they developed the ORC-OR theory, orchestrated objective reduction, which is arguably the most technically demanding theory in all of consciousness studies.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the sheer geometric perfection hiding right inside our own cells. Hameroff pointed Penrose to microtubulins. These are basically the structural scaffolding inside our neurons. Look at these specks. They're 25 nanometers wide, built from 13 protofilaments that form a tubular lattice. And the tubulin proteins themselves are arranged in patterns that perfectly follow the Fibonacci series and the golden ratio. Penrose, being the master of geometry that he is, instantly recognized that this highly specific lattice was sophisticated enough to maintain and isolate quantum superpositions right inside the human brain.
So here is exactly how OR works. Step 1. Quantum superpositions form within those tubulin proteins across the microtubule network. Step 2. The superposition grows and grows until it hits a very specific threshold of gravitational self-energy. Step 3. It triggers spontaneous objective reduction, meaning it collapses on its own. And step 4. That collapse literally produces a single discrete moment of conscious experience. And get this happens about 40 times per second, orchestrating our continuous waking stream of consciousness. It's like a cosmic metronome in your head.
But where does the actual feeling of consciousness come from during that collapse? To understand that, we have to zoom way, way out, or actually scratch that way, way in, down to 1.6 times 10 to the negative 35 meters. This is known as the Planck scale, the absolute smallest, meaningful scale of spacetime. Penrose argues that at this fundamental basement level of the universe, spacetime geometry actually contains proto-conscious properties. These are primitive properties of experience that only become actualized when that microtubule quantum collapse happens.
Section 4. Surviving the warm brain. The decoherence problem. Now, I know exactly what you might be thinking. Isn't the brain completely the wrong environment for quantum physics? You definitely wouldn't be alone in thinking that. For a long time, mainstream neuroscience totally dismissed this theory because of something called the decoherence problem. They argued that delicate quantum superpositions could never, ever survive in the warm, wet, and highly noisy environment of the human biological brain.
To give you some context, to maintain quantum coherence, human-built quantum computing labs have to freeze their qubits to near absolute zero, just a fraction of a Kelvin. Any heat instantly destroys the quantum state. Meanwhile, the human brain is operating at 37 degrees Celsius, or 310 Kelvin. That's a trillion times warmer. Critics argued that any quantum state inside the brain would collapse instantaneously. And for years, this objection essentially killed quantum consciousness theories dead in the water.
But then biology struck back. In 2007, Gregory Engel measured quantum coherence in photosynthesis bacteria at a shockingly warm 77 Kelvin. By 2014, scientists found it happening in plants at normal physiological temperatures. Life had naturally evolved to solve the decoherence problem. Then Jack Tuschinski modeled microtubule networks and proved they could absolutely support coherence. And in 2022, researchers actually measured quantum oscillations in microtubule networks at near biological temperatures. The grand objection that basically killed the theory back in the 90s didn't just fade away. It was completely shattered by actual biological evidence.
Section 5. Does consciousness survive death? The unsettling conclusion. And this brings us right back to the ultimate profound mystery we started with. If our consciousness is intrinsically tied to quantum processes occurring at the absolute deepest layer of spacetime, what actually happens to the mind when the biological microtubules stop functioning? What happens when physical death occurs? So the crucial point we really need to understand here is unitary quantum mechanics. This is an unbreakable rule of physics. The total information content of the universe never increases and it never decreases. It can transform, sure. It can disperse, absolutely. But it is fundamentally conserved. It is never destroyed. So if your individual consciousness is literally constituted by quantum information inside those microtubules, then when your body dies, that specific quantum information cannot simply vanish. To really ground this mind-bending realization, we just have to look to Max Planck, the Nobel-winning founder of quantum mechanics himself. Back in 1931, he stated plainly, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness." Guys, these aren't the words of some mystic. This is the architect of the mathematics upon which all of 20th century physics rests. He was looking right at his equations and realizing that consciousness is the actual bedrock of reality. John Archibald Wheeler, the titan of theoretical physics who actually mentored Richard Feynman, took this idea to its ultimate logical conclusion. He called ours a participatory universe. Wheeler coined the phrase it from bit, arguing that the universe, the it, is fundamentally made of information, the bit, and that information requires conscious minds to process it into definite existence. Without an observer, the universe is basically just an unrealized wave function of possibilities.
When we pull all of these historical threads together, we see a stunning convergence in physics. Von Neumann, Wigner, Wheeler, and Penrose all independently arrived at the exact same radical conclusion. Consciousness is not some accidental byproduct of biological evolution that just showed up late to the party. The conscious principle is fundamental. It doesn't have a beginning and it cannot end because it is the very mechanism that actualizes reality itself. The universe doesn't produce consciousness. Consciousness actualizes the universe.
You know, Penrose set out merely to mathematically define how subjective experience arises, but his incredible framework inescapably leads right here to a consciousness coupled to the Planck scale, the most permanent universal geometry in physics. Your brain is just a specific, localized configuration. When it ceases, the configuration collapses, sure, but the space-time to which your consciousness is intimately coupled persists. The wave function remains. It disperses, but it is never truly gone. So I leave you with this to ponder. If your quantum information is permanently conserved by the deepest laws of physics, what does it truly mean for your mind to disperse into the cosmos? Thank you for joining the Explainer today. Until next time, keep questioning everything, including reality itself.